If you were living in an apartment full of murderers and horrifying monsters, what would you do? You'll be forced to watch everyone you know die in your building, and there's no way to escape. I'm going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the spirit bugs in Aragne, Signs of Vermillion. This girl has no idea that she is about to be brutally murdered. Rin here is your average, shy university girl living in a city full of murderers and violence. She gets off of the train and heads to her new apartment, but realizes that it looks nothing like the ad. Wanting to say something to the apartment manager, she stands at the office door but is too scared to cause any trouble. She heads inside through the entrance of this dark, empty building, but comes across a man staring at a bug on the ground. The bug suddenly dies, and worms start ripping out of its corpse. Horrified, she quickly runs inside as the man creepily watches her walking away. Taking the elevator, the lights begin flickering as the doors open up. She walks out but notices something terrifying right next to her and sees a dark shadow of an elderly woman talking to herself in the corner, scratching and scratching her skin and covered in blood, saying, "The bugs got in. The bugs got in." Rin is shocked and runs straight into her apartment. Later, she takes her medicine and climbs into bed, scared for her life as she hears strange sounds coming from her building. She turns on the news and sees that another person has just been murdered in her area, with this victim found bleeding from the neck. But she doesn't realize that after 5 more murders, it will be her turn to die. Great. We're now stuck in a contract that we don't have the balls to get out of. Rin here not visiting the apartment before signing the contract was a rookie move, to say the least, and is on par with what is the reality of the real estate market when it comes to falsely advertising homes by making them look really nice and you want to live in them, when in reality they're total dumps. And these days, with all the latest tech, tactics to advertise homes includes using the latest and greatest tech to outright distort or even deceive buyers into making the advertised home, even if it's really trash in real life, look amazing in photos. And this makes sense if we think about where she is. A dingy and downright dangerous part of town, which for a college-aged girl is a little concerning, I would say. And this probably means that she can't even trust her closest neighbor because they're all probably nuts. And her not checking out the apartment in advance makes me think that she's quite the most gullible thing here. And worrying about one serial killer around her neighborhood should be the least of her worries, since if she's not careful, literally anywhere she goes in this area will make her a walking target. At this point, I would assess the area and figure out her situation more thoroughly and look into the people living in her area, especially her neighbors and their circumstances, and also employment situation, because poverty breeds crime, and the last thing that Rin needs right now is to find out that she's living next to groups of psychos who will not come to her aid in an emergency, but might even rob her or even worse. The next day, Rin heads back home after her university class and crosses this bridge. Heading down these steps, she suddenly hallucinates her death happening right in front of her, and she collapses in shock. Running to this playground to catch her breath, she takes her medicine and tries to calm down. Suddenly, she sees a strange black-haired girl begin dancing right in front of her. Noticing her stare, the strange girl walks up to Rin and introduces herself as Nasua. Worried about the recent murders around the area, Rin tells her that they have to head home soon before it gets dark. But that's when Nasua reveals that the killings in this area were done by a man known online as the Savior, and that this person purifies lost souls, and tells Rin that this mysterious killer was a part of a secret society that stopped bad curses from happening, but eventually he lost his mind, and now no one is safe. And now Rin thinks that this girl is batshit crazy and leaves, but she has no idea that this woman has already costed her life. Heading back to her apartment, Rin suddenly sees the horrifying corpse of an old woman as EMTs drag her out on a stretcher out of the building. Passing by her body, Rin sees the old woman's hand fall down, just as a horrifying bug explodes from her arm and slithers away right in front of Rin's eyes. Shocked, she begs to speak with the doctors, but they leave her before she can say anything. Suddenly, she notices the same man again from yesterday sitting near her, creeping her out, and she heads back inside. The next morning, Rin desperately tries to search for more information about the bug she saw last night, and begins to think that there is a connection between the bugs that she keeps seeing, the elderly woman, and the recent murders that have begun happening. Just as the police find another other dead victim nearby, making that one down and 4 more to go, and death is just getting started. Later, at her university, Rin looks through the library and comes across a special book. Grabbing it, she suddenly sees horrifying insects spray out from the bookcase. Realizing she's tripping balls, Rin goes to pick up the book and notices a drawing. It's the same bug from last night. Suddenly, this glasses guy walks over and notices the title of her book. Rin tries to walk away, but that's when he suspects that she can see the bugs too. Curious, he asks to talk to her, and she tells him that she thinks that all of these weird events that she's begun to see are just because of her psych meds. But Glasses Guy thinks there is something deeper going on, and mentions that long ago, people used to believe in the concept of spirit bugs, which were said to live within people, and traveled between dimensions to judge the worth of souls. But that's when he reveals something horrifying, and tells Rin that if she has begun to see spirit bugs, then that means that it won't be long until she ends up dead. He hands her a drawing and tells her to watch out for this bug specifically, as the person who drew this red bug died as well, and tells her that if she's not careful, her turn to die will come sooner than she thinks. He hands her his business card, but Rin begins to sweat and leaves him to head back home before the conversation can even finish, not even realizing that that was her biggest mistake. Okay, this is huge, because even though this glasses guy might look like he's got a little bit of a strange glasses guy energy about him, what he's basically saying is that Rin here is royally screwed and will likely soon die if she doesn't do something about it, because up until this point, she's seen countless bugs of all sorts the moment she moved into her apartment. However, there is one variable here that makes me question if what Rin is seeing is truly real or not, because Rin here thinks that what she's been seeing recently has been due to her psych medication, which, judging from the context of that, may mean that Rin suffers from some sort of psychosis, which is a condition that makes people lose contact with reality, believing certain delusions that may not be actually real. And judging from how Rin is acting, this may mean that she is in the early stages of developing psychosis, also known as attenuated psychosis syndrome, where people suffer only mild delusions and when the condition hasn't fully developed yet. This means that Rin has 2 factors to consider here, folks. 1, from her instability in the brain, 2, to what this creepy glasses guy is telling us. And judging from the types of bugs Rin has seen, it likely won't be long before she comes across that red spirit bug that he is talking about. This means that if I were Rin, I would not leave Glasses Guy's site until we understand what we're up against. And I'd also study up on learning the mythology of the spirit bugs, and I'd find anyone else who might know more about this. But also, in Rin's emotional state, she forgot to note one very important detail that Glasses Guy told her about, and that was that he has seen the spirit bugs too. Ding 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 ding! She should have picked up on that one, which means, according to the lore, it's only a matter of time until he's dead too. This means that Rin might have had a better chance if she stuck by his side, since he knows what she's going through, and Rin may be able to use Glasses Guy as a, you guessed it, shield of meat, if she needs to, because one thing's for sure, staying in a group is better than going at this solo, so finding people in her same situation will be one method to ensure her survival, or at the very least, better her chances at making it out of this alive. Terrified, Rin runs back home and immediately inspects Glasses Guy's business card, but she notices something strange behind her. Turning around, she sees the lights in the distance begin to flicker and her heart begins to race. Suspicious, she turns around and continues to walk when she hears the footsteps of someone else behind her, and she hears the horrifying sound of an electric saw turning on. Rin starts running, reaching the 2nd floor as fast as she can, and the killer begins catching up to her. Seeing this random empty apartment, she quickly enters it and locks the door behind her. Thinking the worst is over, she tries to catch her breath, but she suddenly hears a violent banging on the door. The killer tries to get in as Rin watches in horror, but suddenly all the noise stops, not knowing whose apartment she's in. Predictably, she begins to look around. Hearing something through this doorway, she decides to cautiously check it out, but suddenly blacks out. Later, Rin wakes up back in her apartment with no memory of how she got there. She steps out of her balcony to catch her breath, but notices Nasua. Wanting to discuss what just happened, Rin tries to follow the black-haired girl heading down into the 2nd building, but then she suddenly starts to have a painful attack, blurring her vision, and she blacks out again. Later, she wakes up outside of her apartment, and she sees the same man from the beginning, Hipster Guy. He tells her he rescued her, and that he is an observer of insects, and plans to master their rituals. Confused as all hell, Rin tries to take some of her meds, but discovers that hipster guy threw out her pills. He tells her that she shouldn't be taking that medicine, and this pisses Rin off. Feeling bad, the man takes off his hipster necklace and hands it to Rin, telling her that this will protect her, and that she should not go to that part of her building ever again. Later in her room, Rin begins to research about the horrifying murders that keep happening in her area, and discovers that all the victims died of blood loss, but had their necks broken at a right angle, which means that the killer broke their neck after they were already dead. Researching further, Rin discovers an old article that reveals that the recent murdered bodies match the description of a mysterious disease that struck this area 40 years ago. Rin is horrified and quickly heads down to her library to find more local information about the disease, discovering that 40 years ago there was a disease in this area called the tilting sickness, which causes the patients of this disease to suffer mutations of their neck and spine, and that they all came into contact with the same red bug Rin saw earlier. However, the true cause of the incident was never discovered. Okay, this is ludicrous, because right now, Rin has just discovered a huge secret, and this likely explains why her student apartment was within her affordable price range, and explains the false advertising that lured her into renting it to begin with. What creepo glasses guy here basically told Rin is that the patients in those experiments all those years ago suffered mutations of the cervical vertebrae, which consists of the first 7 vertebrae or backbones in your spine, and this could explain how and why the killer chose to break the victims' necks as a sort of homage to what happened all those years ago. However, it's not clear to what degree the murderer broke the victim's neck. However, there is a chance that these victims aren't entirely as innocent as they seem. As mentioned from Nasua, she called the killer the savior, which means this person could be killing as a means to an end, or to put a stop to something that he considers to be evil within this area. And these victims having their necks broken in the exact same way as the lab experiments 40 years ago could mean there's more going on behind how these victims are dying, and if they are in any way connected to the mutated lab rats who also have spine mutations. And this means that the killer within this area may not be the only thing that Rin needs to keep a close eye on, because all of this is too much of a coincidence. Back in her apartment block, hipster guy investigates the apartment that Rin went into earlier, and he tries to look for clues as to what really happened. Entering this dark room, he suddenly notices something sinister fly past him, just as this terrifying creature appears from above his head and brutally kills him, devouring his lifeless corpse and swallowing him up completely. That's 2 down, and 3 more to go. Meanwhile, walking back home from the library, Rin tries to call Glasses Guy for more answers, but he doesn't pick up, just as a horrifying black ghost briefly appears in front of her, and she then thinks that it's her friend from earlier, Nasua. Rin watches her dance and begins to think that everything is going to be okay, but that's when she notices that something is off about her, and she heads back home, and she has no idea that she's just seen something horrifying. Later in the shower, Rin starts dancing exactly like Nasua, trying to remember what she saw, and that's when it hits her. Nasua had a tilt in her neck. She now has the tilting sickness. Horrified, she runs to go find Nasua and save her before it's too late, and she begins to hallucinate her friend covered in red bugs. Rin then sees Nasua in the distance and chases her down into her apartment block, and she enters this dark area. Suddenly, she comes across the same killer from earlier and Nasua, who is now turned into a horrifying creature, and both of these killers suddenly charge at Rin from both directions. All of a sudden, Blonde Stud shows up out of nowhere and decapitates Rin's friend right in front of her eyes. Seeing Nasua dead, Rin tries to attack Blonde Stud in anger, and he tries to tell her that Nasua had turned into what is known as a dead soul soldier, spirits from another realm that invade the body of someone about to die when their spirit bug leaves their body. And once the dead soldier invades a corpse, well, that corpse becomes an unstoppable killing machine. Blonde Stud tells Rin that someone is creating these dead soul soldiers and that it is up to him to stop them. He tells Rin to get out of town as soon as possible and that he'll stop all of this evil from happening and save the world and look badass doing it. Suddenly, a car on the highway flies off of the road and smashes through the building window and brutally kills Blonde Stud and destroys humanity's greatest hope. All the while as Rin tries to figure out what the hell just happened. And that's 3 down and 2 more to go. Okay, this is the most crazy shit that I've ever seen happen in the span of 5 minutes in a while, because the badass Blonde Stud dude looked more silly dying than a pig wearing lipstick, which brings me up to my point. The type of evil that Rin is facing is more than just evil soul-possessed zombies, and not to mention masked killers with blades trying to kill her. As noted earlier, spirit bugs are apparently within all human beings, essentially just like our souls. But the absence of a spirit bug within a body means that the human in question will basically have an empty room sign on him, and it means that their body could be possessed by one of these dead soul soldiers, since the mythology of spirit bugs is that they all live within us, unless someone reports seeing bugs, which therefore would be an indication that they will die soon. Unless that happens, there is just no way for us to know who else is at risk of having their spirit bug leave their body. And this likely is what happened to the same person who just drove his car through the window and killed humanity's greatest hope, badass blonde stud. And without his greatness, it's doubtful that Rin will survive at all. She's toast. But what Rin could do at this point, instead of being a useless passive protagonist, she could choose to actively find more people like Glasses Guy, essentially shamans or mystical experts familiar with dealing with the concept of spirit bugs and everything surrounding that whole topic, rather than simply trying to do her own research and save the day all by herself, just like every main character tries to do in a horror film. And remember, she's just a university student, basically still a kid, and science tells us that kids are stupid, which means that she'd be better off seeking out direct help rather than trying to solo this level like some cocky noob. Don't do that. Don't be a noob. Horrified, Rin gets the hell out of there, but suddenly gets visions of Nasua's spirit crying, and she tries to chase her spirit down and catches up to her in this apartment. Rin hugs her and thinks that everything will be okay. But that's when Nasua suddenly pushes her down into this dark hole. Waking up, she realizes in horror at where she is and sees a huge pile of corpses right beneath her feet. Suddenly, she hears the screams of the corpses under her, and she tries to run away, coming across this iron door. However, she notices thousands of red bugs right above her head and freaks the hell out just as she notices an exit to escape from. Not being able to reach it, she begins piling corpses one by one near the exit until she finally has enough corpses to make a human ladder. Climbing out through this vent, she lands in this sinister empty room and discovers a film of the experiments from 40 years ago about the horrifying diseases, discovering that the creation of the dead soul soldiers was done on purpose, not realizing that one of these monsters is about to come back and try to kill her. Rin stares at this projector in horror, just as this terrifying monster drops and tries to attack her, forcing her to crawl for her sweet life. Climbing under these tables, the monster starts to catch up to Rin as she reaches this wall, but suddenly it disappears. Just then, her hands get tied down by this monster, and she sees it appear right above her, staring at death in the face. She prepares to die right here, but suddenly, Hipster Guy's necklace protects her for a split second, and Rin takes this chance, and she runs towards this lift just as she sees a moth fly past her, the same one from earlier, and realizes that it's Hipster Guy's spirit. The moth flies into the monster's mouth, killing it in a horrifying explosion as Rin barely manages to escape. The explosion causes the lift to fall as it hits the bottom floor. Getting out, she finds countless drawings all over the floor of the red moth, and she heads through this tunnel. And she then finds this fresh corpse of Glasses Guy floating right in front of her. That's 4 down, with 1 more to go. Horrified, Rin begins to panic, but suddenly sees a knife plunging straight towards her chest by this psycho chick, causing her to pass out. What? This is insane, because at this point, it's pretty clear that science is not gonna help us out on this one. Because even from the get-go, it makes no sense why Rin decided to remain as complacent as she was when it was obvious based on her area of living that she was gonna run into some trouble to begin with. Also, Rin not noticing the psycho lady behind her seems unlikely, as due to what Rin experienced with the monster just now, that rush of adrenaline she likely felt during that encounter would have still been coursing through her body, meaning that Rin would have continued to feel the effects of increased alertness, improved vision, hearing, and other senses. Because of this, even if she wasn't feeling a biophysical response already, common sense would have dictated that she was in a dangerous area. She doesn't know where she is, meaning she should have already paid closer attention to her surroundings and should have been more on edge anyways. It's amazing to me how her non-observant nature through this whole journey has now proved to us that she deserves whatever hell this sweet girl runs into. Later, she wakes up and finds herself trapped in a mysterious chamber, and she begins to have horrifying visions of bugs overrunning the city. And all of a sudden, she has a flashback to her youth, of her and Nasua getting into a bloody fight, and she realizes what's going on. Suddenly, the machine she's in explodes, and Rin manages to turn back time, going back to when she was just stabbed. And she makes this psycho chick get blown to shit, and somehow she grows out these lunar moth wings, which are so freaking pretty. Look at them. And she sees her friend Nasua symbolically give up her life for Rin's, all the while as the entire Matrix blows up. But that's when Rin finally wakes up for real and realizes that she's been in a coma tripping balls since she was a child, and how she got in a coma was from getting into a fight with her best friend Nasua all those years ago. She finally makes peace for the shit that her childhood friend put her through, just as she sees a sea of bugs taking over the city. But what do you guys think about the video? It's a crazy one, right? Let us know what you like about it and what you didn't like about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and as always, don't forget to check out our How to Beat playlist.